Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another
Another one.
episode.
We keep them
Another one.
coming.
They
Yes.
didn't kick the Gaslit Truth podcast out yet of anything.
No, as a
We
matter of
are
fact, we keep rolling up the
we
charts.
are rocking, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
it's
I am
amazing.
your host, Therapist Jenn, along with my superpower
Mm.
co-host.
Dr. Teralyn.
What's your superpower today, by the way?
I don't really have one. Not
Really?
today. Yeah,
Oh,
no, I
come
don't
on. You got to
know.
have something.
I'll think about it by the end of the episode and then I'll report back.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, my superpower today is that I actually was able to get up at like 5 a.m. and do
I
all the
got up
things
early
before I
too.
sat
Yeah.
before I sat and started recording here. So that's my
Nice. Yeah,
superpower.
you've
I
been
actually
you've
made it.
been busy this morning and I've just been laying around going,
Yeah,
when do I
I
meet
know.
with Jen for the
I
podcast?
know. I'm ready now, Jen. Sorry, Terry. I need another hour. I'm at my other job right now.
Exactly. Exactly. But it gave me some time to think, because I've
Yeah.
been thinking a lot about the podcast, and it's been so you guys might know that this is like my 3rd or 4th shot at a podcast. Like, this is not my podcast number 1. But I think this is the charm. I
Yes,
really
it is.
do.
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
But because we get so much great feedback, we're rolling up the charts. And so I just kind of took a moment to reflect back on that. It's a lot of work for Jen and I to do this podcast between this and everything else that we do.
Oh,
Because
our other jobs,
our other jobs and
the
our
real
other
job,
lives.
the adulting job, the ones
Exactly.
that are great, but this one's way more fun.
Exactly. But it's just us, we are a
Yeah.
two-person show here, and so it's a lot of work, but it's so good to hear all the feedback, and I was just like, I really feel like this is a place for me that I can be me. Like, I feel like I'm just being me on here, but I don't know
Mhm.
that I change me between here and anywhere else. But I feel like I can just be me and say what's on my mind and hopefully inspire some conversation outside of here. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that, getting all kind of misty eyed this morning, going,
Oh.
this one really just feels good to me. So I'm hoping that it feels good to everybody else and that you let us know that you're liking what you're hearing so that we can keep motivated and keep going on this
Yeah.
one. So
It
yes.
there are motivators that we do have to have, and
Oh,
typically they come from people giving us feedback or telling us their story
oh, that
or
too.
or
The amount,
sending us a link,
Jen.
like the stories we are getting in our email, which,
Oh,
if you've got a story you wanna share, whether you're wanting to come on the podcast, whether you are wanting to just share some information and you'd rather just be anonymous, but you're okay with us sharing your story without using too much detail, or you just wanna give us a, "Hey, you guys are doing great," or maybe you guys should work on this a little, and if it's constructive, great, let us
we'll
know, and if
take
it's
it.
not and it's
Mhm.
judgmental, we're gonna go, "Bop, see you later."
Yep.
uh,
Exactly.
but
Don't
but
do
the
that.
stories we're getting are so,
Oh.
they're validating in the way that, we know what we're doing I
Mhm.
is helping people, one, feel like they're not on an island and that they're alone, that they're not the only
Mhm.
people suffering from some of the harms of gaslighting across the board, right? But two, it lets people be in a vulnerable space with us, which is
Yeah.
is it's very motivating for us because we know that there's people out there that are benefiting from this. Which, I mean,
Never in my wildest
it's what it
dreams
is.
did I expect to get some of these emails that we have gotten with
Yeah,
these deeply painful and personal stories of
yeah,
people, and I appreciate all of that, and every time I read it, like, I
yeah.
have to be in a space to read it. I no longer do I just open an email and start reading. I'm like,
Same.
I need to be ready for this
Yeah,
because I don't know what the story is going to be, and
yeah,
usually it's one of extreme pain.
yeah,
And sometimes it's, I'm getting out the other side or I've made it out the other side or I need help getting out
yeah,
the other side. So anyway, we appreciate all of that. And so this is why, like this morning when I was reflecting, I'm like, we're therapists and I know that we help people all the time, but I feel like this is different still.
hmm,
Like
yeah,
the impact that we can have just through sharing stories, our stories. Like
yeah,
I think sometimes our stories are the most impactful. Like people want to know,
yeah.
where we've been. But that was just it this morning as I was, thinking
Aw.
thoughtfully about the Gaslit Truth podcast, and I just wanted to share that on the air. Yeah.
Well, that's it feels good for me too to hear you say that, knowing that you've done multiple podcasts and I have
Yes.
not. So I'm just like,
Mhm.
okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe
Yes. Well,
this is
there
the
is
ding
something
ding, and I'm
here.
I'm helping
Yeah.
out a little bit with this somewhere in the universe, right? But we
there is something here, Jen, and so I'm just grateful to be doing it with you.
yeah,
Mhm.
same.
All
We
right.
we
Now
have
over
a
over all the mushy gushy stuff.
I know,
Let's
I'm like, "I can only sit this
get
for
me out
so
of this
long."
uncomfortable
I'm
space.
starting to get uncomfortable, damn
Yes,
it.
yes.
I, we you were just mentioning the stories that we get, and we have, multiple ways that you can reach out to us, right? So, we
Mhm.
are on all the main podcast platforms, right, that you listen to, so you can go to listen to us pretty much anywhere that you listen to a podcast for the most part, right?
Check us out on
And then
YouTube as well.
yeah, you can
Mhm.
also get us on YouTube, which is fun because sometimes we have props or I'm making faces or
Right.
I don't know,
We're just staring wistfully into
Terry's
each
wearing
other's
something
eyes.
fabulous and you
Oh,
wanna see what she's
right.
wearing,
Jen
right?
will wear her fur coat one day on the air.
Oh, man.
Jen's fur.
It's in the closet next to me, because this is where I keep my furs.
Too
Because
funny.
even though this looks pretty, I'm in a basement, people. Like, if I turn my camera, you're gonna see a big wrecking ball of a mess over here, so we'll just stay right here.
Oh, this is very thoughtfully curated behind me.
Yeah, yeah,
What's
I
in
mean, there's
front of me
yeah,
is,
I
not the same.
know. One of these
Or
days,
next
I'll
to
just we're
me.
gonna do that. I'll do that next
Do a
episode. I'll do
pan
a quick
around the
360
room.
so
Yeah.
people can see, like, what
Because
I'm
this
actually
this,
looking at.
behind us is the gaslighting
It is,
of the
yeah.
whole
It's
thing.
the
Yes.
staging of things,
Staging, yes.
right?
Mhm. It's funny.
But we are on YouTube, so you could check us out there.
Mhm.
And then we are on all the big socials. So we're on Facebook and we are on Instagram. Terry and I myself are on TikTok, so we do a lot of promo
Mhm.
on there as well. So you gotta check out all our places. And for many of you, as you've discovered, you can email us your stories, or if you want to come
Yes.
on, or just some information to the Gaslit Truth Podcast at gmail.com.
You
So
got it. You
that
got
being
it.
said, there you go. You know all about us now.
That's right. Kick off
Yeah.
with some fan feedback.
Yeah,
Let's do
so
that.
we've got some fan feedback. This one was given not on our socials. I actually had somebody that I know that I haven't connected with in a very long time who reached out to me personally and sent me a message, and it was in regards to the episode that we did where I talked about getting off of Lexapro and my titration story.
I think it was called Broken Brain, right?
Broken brain is what it was.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the message was, I listened to your podcast on the broken brain. I've been on 20 milligrams of Lexapro for 30 plus years. Maybe I'm not broken.
You're not broken.
Ah. And that was
Mm.
those are the the feedback you get when you're like and you just pause. Yep,
Yeah, because you really
there it
that
is.
came from you hit a nerve and let
Yeah.
someone think differently about themselves instead of
Yeah.
being broken.
Yeah.
And that is the whole point of this
Yeah,
podcast.
that's just it. Yes,
Yes,
like you
the whole point.
there's an alternate truth and you can get curious about it. And even in the case of this individual, right, after 30 years, right, of being on this medication, there are options.
Yeah, what? Who knew that?
Oh,
Mhm.
there are options. Yeah, so that was a pretty cool fan
Yeah.
feedback one to
Well,
get.
and I just wanna throw in a little healthy plug for Jen and I. Some of the options are working with us.
Yeah.
Yes, helping you
Uh-huh.
with your med tapers or just helping you with your mental well-being through the health of your brain. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Mhm.
All right.
It's what
Wow.
it's what we do.
It's what we do.
Amongst
All right.
many things. So let's let's dive into today's topic. Uh
Yes. So I'm not even sure how to introduce this topic, but it's near and dear to Jen and I. And most of you will know that we have spent our time working in the prisons, Jen longer than I, but we have both been there in the swill of it.
we
And
have.
we're going to talk a little bit more about it because I think people are still curious.
Mhm.
There's a curiosity around not being able to know what is behind the walls, not being able to know what happens,
Yeah.
because it's not just about the inmates there, it's also about the staff.
Yep.
And the staff are just as much incarcerated as the inmates, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And they're also they're just as heavily impacted
Yeah.
as the people who reside there. So here we are.
Yeah, we when Terry and I came up with this brainchild of the Gaslit Truth podcast, we spent quite some time writing down topics, things that really could be that we thought could be good for people to know about. And we came up, we had a list of like 30 or more of them, right? 40 of them. And
Mhm.
so we were like, okay, we got enough content to start episodes, right? So when we were trying to figure out what to talk about for this episode, I went back to that original list. And we had come up with titles, which, now we don't always follow the titles we've come up with because, AI does this great job of generating things that people
They
want
do.
to actually hear for a
Yeah.
title versus like the shit that comes out of Jen's brain for a title. Because
Right.
I think it's engaging, but,
Right.
like the rest of the world
Mhm.
doesn't. So, but what we had titled this was that prison is not glamorous,
It's
and that
no.
we go in. When I say we, now the spirit of this is inmates, but also the staff. We go in without trauma and come out traumatized.
Staff and inmates.
Yeah,
And so this prison not being glamorous, it's an interesting thing because I would think that most people are like, no, it's not glamorous.
yeah.
How could you talk about it being glamorous? I'm like, well, because it's kind of fantasized
It's
in
very fantasized in television
yes,
and in
on television,
movies.
movies,
Yes,
and social media. So
yes,
there's a whole social media, and I'm not saying that people don't deserve to be loved or whatever, but just be cautious because on TikTok and social media, there's a lot of inmate relationships and all of that going on. And I just
yeah,
saw one the other day, which was a couple of younger girls. They were on a balcony and they were showing off their butts to um, the prison. I don't know if it was a jail or prison that was in a high
yeah,
rise building. And that happens. There's high rise building in where we live too.
yeah.
Um, and they were turning around on a balcony and showing the inmates their butts, right?
Mhm,
And you could hear the men out there
mhm.
hooting and hollering and,
Sure,
all of this stuff, and the
sure.
girls were like, "Oh, this is so great." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Mm,
Yeah, it is glamorized, and sexualized, by the
mhm,
media. I have personal experience with having an inmate that was, somebody that was a client, of mine for a little bit, but then I supervised this inmate for a long time, and she ended up being on Love After Lockup, which is a show on
you
television. I don't
should
know
have
if you
seen what I just did." I was like, "What?"
Yeah, I
Go
don't know
to
if I ever
YouTube
even
and watch my
shared this
response.
with you, right?
I
Like,
can't remember.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and what I found because of course I'm watching this show, because I'm so intrigued by how the media spun this individual's story. And
mhm,
of course, the media was there. We are recording things. They're not allowed on prison grounds, but they are allowed right across the street, where those grounds stop, right?
I do remember this story.
For
Yes, go
recording.
ahead.
And so
Yeah,
we would,
mhm,
as staff, we would see this happening. The individual that was on the other side, out as a citizen here, a civilian out, like what we're considered here. That individual would be interviewed by them. And I would see this person almost every week, every other week, because this person would come and visit the inmate because they
mhm.
were in a relationship for quite some time. And so the show got involved, and the day the individual was picked up from prison, there was the show right on grounds
Sure.
across the street filming all of it.
God, can you
And
imagine that? It's like getting out of the military and suddenly you're on TV.
yes, well, yeah,
Like
I mean that's what I mean.
the
We had troops,
transition
the troops that
transition
went through that.
yeah,
Yep.
the
Hmm.
transition from incarceration to the real world is now suddenly broadcast
And
live.
let me tell you, okay,
Mhm.
what you see on TV is not this glamorous. Now, in
No.
this case, this individual was picked up by a family, Starbucks waiting in the car for this person.
Seems
This
kinda
person sitting
staged.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
sitting in the back like, I'm so glad to be out. Well, what do you wanna do? I wanna go do this." Okay, let me tell you, when most people are picked up or released from a prison, that is not the glam that happens at
No.
all. You are being driven, sometimes across the state by officers, sometimes the feds, because they're going to come pick you up when you're done serving your time. You're going to go serve federal time because of what
Right.
you've done. You're going to straight to your agent. You're trying to figure out how the hell to get on a bus because you've got your bus ticket, but we're going to plop you at the bus station. And here you come with all you've got as your clothes on your back, trying to figure out how to get from the bus to the bus to the bus in the real world because you've been behind bars for 10 years and don't understand how the Greyhound system works anymore, even though we've
Mhm.
tried to give you everything. Like, this is how releases work. Inmates get released to motels because they
And
have
by the
nowhere to
way,
go.
talk about the time of day that they get released. Is it
Yeah.
always at noon,
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
No, no,
No.
and it's not the perfect time of day. It's we've got releases that were happening at the crack of dawn. It all
Yep,
depends because if a county that's coming to pick you up is coming at 7 a.m., you better be ready. Have your
yep,
things ready.
mhm.
It's not this the way that it's glamorously presented on a show such as Love After Lockup. Now were all the episodes like that? No, but this was one of them, and this is not how it is for
Right.
most people. So as somebody who could be very heavily influenced, right? Oh, well, look at it. Must be so great in the prison because the
Not so bad.
staff walk you out and there's your family waiting for you with your Starbucks and
Mm.
your favorite things you've been missing for the last 2 years because you've been locked up, sitting in the car, sitting in the Lexus, by the way, and you've got your mom and your dad. There they are. Okay, this is not reality. Now, for some, yes, it's their truth and it happens, but let me tell
Sure.
you, it's not. But that's how it's presented. So, long story short, to give a little bit of information
Mhm,
on how things are sexualized and glamorized, right, for TV.
mhm. Well, I knew a guy, and I believe he was being released from a county jail. The story was a county jail story,
Yeah.
and they released him just after midnight on a bike.
And that has happened too. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
I think what is important to say today, because there's going to be some stories that Terry and I tell, right? There's going to be like, here's one I just told, right? Like, something for people to remember is that this is our experience. This is how the prison systems or the jail systems within the
mhm,
state that we reside in work. Is it like this everywhere? No. The
mm,
state we live in, actually, compared to other states, is a little kinder, softer, gentler, and does
mhm.
things in an actual a manner that is a little bit more humane. And I'm going to say that.
It's not like Texas, right?
Uh, right.
Sorry,
It's not.
yes.
So some of you might be listening, right? Because
Mhm.
I know we have listeners right across the globe now,
Everywhere.
right?
Mhm.
Like, and the prisons, what we're gonna say, they're gonna be like, well, gosh, you should see what's happening here. I mean, over
Oh,
here
yeah.
in Russia, there is no prison because if
Mhm.
you're deemed an alcoholic, and we're gonna inject you with a substance that if you drink alcohol, it's gonna put you into convulsions and harm you. Yeah, that's
Right.
real. Okay, we don't
Mhm.
do that here in the state that we live in. Uh, but I just want to
No.
throw that out there because
Mhm.
that's not the spirit of this episode. The spirit of this episode is to really talk about the harm and the not glamour that is the prison system, and that how we come in very clean and unscathed and come out traumatized. And I will
Yeah,
raise my hand saying that word as a
me
staff
too.
member.
Me
That is
too. And
went in without the trauma and came out harmed.
with right, and I'm not saying that I have PTSD trauma, but I have definite have
Yeah.
I've been traumatized, you know? And
Yes.
so Jen and I our stories of entrance into the prison system is a little bit different, right? You wanted to work in the prison
I
system, like, that
did.
was something that she
I
was like,
did. I wanted
"Yes,
to work for the
yes."
FBI. I couldn't.
Yeah,
Wanted to so bad. I just wanted to be Jodie Foster from Silence of
yeah,
the Lambs. That's all I wanted.
right, which is
Yeah, I know, it's bad,
glamorized.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's okay.
exactly, like,
It's like,
yes,
what?
yes,
But that
right,
was what I wanted. I was so
right.
intrigued by her.
And so it's weird because there's also other psychologists and things like that that we worked with that wanted to work in the prison,
Mhm.
and I didn't. So weirdly, my entrance into the prison was through a practicum experience that I had. I needed to find my first practicum as a master's degree student. And if anyone knows what that is, it's a non-paid or
Shit show.
unpaid, yes, like an
You're
internship.
broke.
Yeah, you're broke, you
You're
don't get
looking for
paid,
whatever you can
whatever,
find.
and you need to get so many hours done through the course of your studies, whatever. And I had applied and got accepted to like 3 of them, and they all fell apart because of lack of staffing. And so my last ditch effort was the prison system, and I got on the internet and I did it, and I immediately got said, "Yes, come to maximum security."
The
And I was
dark
like, "Oh,
underbelly
no."
of
Like, "Oh,
chaos.
yes."
I think that's like the
Because I
first line in one of our deliverables for our show, the
yes.
dark underbelly
But
of
I
sanity,
but
right?
I think the
Yeah,
hardest part for me with that, and I talked to my father about this because he was in policing my entire childhood and, chief and all this stuff. And I talked to him and he goes, "I think it would be good for you to see that side of things." And I was like, "But I was raised good guy, bad guy."
yeah,
Like that's how I was raised. Like stay away from certain people, good
yeah,
guy, bad guy,
yeah,
all of that stuff. And so it was really, I mean, I would go on when I was in high school, I would go with my dad in a squad car in third shift, right? In the
yeah,
community that I lived in, which was a part of it was a pretty hard knocks side of the community, and um he at this was the 80s, so you could actually go in with them, like
yeah.
get out of the car and go in, and they don't do that anymore, like, but
No,
I'm
you don't even get to
thankful.
ride in a car
Right,
anymore
like
as a child
ride-alongs or
with your
whatever,
that's
right,
yeah, I mean,
whatever.
that is so
Yeah,
vetted out
I
before you're
was like a
even doing the
sixteen-year-old.
ride-along.
Yes. I was like 16.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was my
yeah,
dad's version of scared straight or what, but he let me
probably.
do it, and I did it multiple times, and
Yeah,
so there is a definite good guy, bad guy mentality. So going into the prison system to be helpful was very interesting to me because my background was punitive, right? Like,
yeah,
this is punishment. And
yeah,
so I had to really work through a lot of that early on, and realize that these were all human beings doing human being things, and they're going to get out and they're going to be our neighbors. So I had to reconcile all of that within me. But during that time, um, the I never understood the person who wanted to work there, like, the psychologist or whatever, who wanted that is the thing that I want, because it was the thing that I didn't want,
yeah,
but it turned out to be the thing that I needed, right? Like, to give me a different perspective of life. Um, and then it rolled into, a career in other places within the system, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, and I got to go into Supermax and do some psych evals, and you're not supposed to call it Supermax, but at the time, Supermax,
Yep.
doing some psych evals, which
Mhm.
was really cool and interesting. Definitely not as glamorous again
Yeah,
as you would think. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of humanity that I found within myself there, while doing those psych evaluations. So
mhm,
it's very interesting, but definitely nothing. I've never watched those prison shows. I
mhm.
just couldn't do it. Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't even watch what's Cops, I could
Bad
never
boys,
watch
bad
Bad
boys.
Boys.
Okay,
What you
the
gonna do?
first
Yeah.
ride-along I ever did
Yeah.
was with my this is such a squirrel moment, was with my cousin who is a police officer, and I was looking to getting into policing my, freshman year that I started college, like, right after high school, right? And
Mhm.
I thought about getting into policing, and
You'd be a
so it
good
was
cop, by the way. You'd be a good cop.
yeah, I think so, but I would, but I wouldn't because I can't that's why I'm not in the prison system either, because I couldn't seem to really follow all of the rules because
Yeah.
it's not there for me.
Yeah.
That's where
I
I
was such
struggled.
a rule
This is
follower, I
where I
probably should have
struggled
been a
as a
cop.
supervisor because I
Yeah.
really struggled, and that was what I walked out doing. I went from being a psych to supervisor, and I walked out from that because I couldn't quite follow these rules that we're going to
Mhm.
talk about today. Because you've got your penal codes, your justice codes, and then you have prison code and what that means. So we're going to
Yeah,
talk
but
about that.
yes, but I wanna say, like, I part of the problem for me working in the prison was that I was such a rule follower with my
Oh,
history, such a
dang
rule
it.
follower. There were so many rules to follow that
I
I didn't
know.
understand. Like, I can follow rules that I understand. It doesn't even mean agreement with, it means understand. There were
Mhm.
so many things that were being done that I had this lack of understanding, but I still had to follow what it
Yes.
was, like,
Yes.
that what is that, cognitive dissonance when that happens,
Sure.
right? Like,
Sure.
that happened for me a lot,
Mhm.
but yet because I have such a rule following history,
Yeah.
that I fell in line a lot,
Mhm.
right? Even though I
That's
grappled with the idea of should I be following in line here or
yeah.
not,
Which ties us into the
Ugh.
gaslighting part of being staff
Yeah.
because we are gaslit in many ways and we fall in line and we follow suit. And one of the biggest things that it starts with is how we are trained when we walk through the door and
Mhm.
what we are taught. Bad boys, what you gonna do? I sing that at the top of my lungs on a ride along. Believe that. You're a cop. You have a student with you and you're
Right.
going to a call, right?
Yeah.
And that
He's like,
person next to
"Bad
you who
boys,
wants to be a
bad
cop
boys.
starts like lights and sirens. We're going in
This is
hot. And
great.
I'm
This
going,
is great.
bad boys, bad boys. What you
What you
gonna
gonna
do?
do?
I mean,
What you
I
gonna do?"
remember the guy was with me and actually I knew him and he looked at me like, are you fucking kidding me right now?
Like, "You're
Like,
not gonna be a cop, are you really?"
you are not allowed to be
No.
a cop. Like, yeah.
No.
But back to
I
that,
was
like,
just scared
I just
shitless.
I had to throw that in there because I'm like, okay, this is the stupid shit Jen did when she was 19 trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life, right? Okay.
Yes.
So anyways, your
Sorry,
dad
I just had a flashback of
your
my
dad would
father
have been
because
like, "Oh,
be
he's
oh,
probably rolling
because
in his grave."
I'll never forget because, like, he's like, "Okay, if anything goes down, you need to run back to the squad and duck." And I was like, "That was it, that was my plan.
That's it.
Run back to the squad and
It's very
duck and
strategic.
cover." Yeah.
We
I was
you
like
know
this, "Okay, dad.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Gotta follow
okay.
the rules,
Yes."
right? So, if you think about, the idea of gaslighting and how there's a military mindset to this as well, okay? And I don't
Mhm.
I want also people listening to this episode, this is gonna apply not only for correctional officers, okay, but also or anyone in corrections or the field, right? But also, like, policing. This is
Mhm.
fire, this is emergency rescue, EMT, like, this is all of this. Um, when you enter a prison, you are trained, at least okay in our state, you are trained under some of those same rules and precautionary measures, right, that are taken if you are being trained within a police department, within fire. The rules of engagement don't change that much when it comes to you are entering into a population where every single day you have to watch your back.
Mhm.
um, you are taught to be hyper vigilant from the second you walk through the door. Most training facilities or correctional facilities have some fairly decent, and I'm going to say decent. I know Wisconsin, we really do here some good training programs
Mhm.
for the prison systems for staff. And by good, I mean we are learning what it is to be a sitting duck and what you need to watch for and how you can be manipulated. We got
Mhm.
training on psychopathology. Terry and I did in the
Mhm.
specific facility we worked on because we worked with a lot of inmates who had psychopathology and a lot of really high antisocial, strong character logic.
Yes.
Gaslighting, very smart, manipulative people. And so we had to be taught how to be one step ahead of them and what to watch for.
So it's interesting because I remember it was like the first week that I stepped foot into maximum security and I was walking in. So the walk was quite a distance from the entrance gates to the psych services building. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had to walk through and down, whatever. And there was a guard who walked right next to me and said quietly to me, "Pick your head up," meaning look up,
Yep.
right? And as we were walking, he's walking and he's not looking at me, he's looking straight, he's looking around, and he goes, "You don't need to be hyper vigilant, but you need to be aware. So you got to walk with your head straight up and you got to make eye contact."
Yep.
And I was like, "Sounds good." Because I'm sure that I was like, "Just
Oh, sure.
get me
Yeah.
to my building with my head down
Yep.
and, just
Yep.
blazing a trail to get where I'm gonna need to go, you
So there's
know?"
day 1, right?
Yes, training on hypervigilance, day number
Yeah,
1,
day 1, right? Yeah, what do you do with
Yes,
your head and where are your hands and what's in them?
right,
Because
exactly,
you need
all of
empty
these
hands,
things,
empty
right?
hands. Mhm.
Yes, so when
Yep.
we were in, this is a complete segue and different when we were in, New York City with my kids, I noticed that my daughter was walking down New York City with her face in her phone a lot, okay? Her face was in her phone, she wasn't paying a lick of attention, and all I kept thinking to myself and I would tell her, "You gotta look up. You gotta look at people. You gotta be aware because you are creating vulnerability to be, a
Mhm.
victim of something, with
Yeah,
your head down and
yeah.
all of these things." So that was day number 1,
Right,
or week
so
week number 1,
so you walk in without that awareness,
Right.
okay. I actually made a list of a few things that I
Oh, geez.
remember
Bring 'em
within
on.
the first, like and now this is me, okay, this was me, so let's just put that out there, right? But within the first, like, month or so of corrections, there were some things in my life that I changed, greatly changed, okay?
Mhm.
um, nobody was allowed to answer my front door in my home.
Oh, this
Eh
is, like, personally you changed.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. Oh
Yes.
gosh.
Except for me.
Yeah, I
Okay.
yeah.
When I went on to have children, not only did that become a standard in the house, to a point where if one of them would try to answer the door, I remember them being very little and like screaming,
Mhm.
um, because you don't know who's on the other side of that door, Terry,
I
right?
remember thinking when you were pregnant, because we worked together, at least when you were pregnant with your first child. I don't remember
Yeah,
I think I
first.
was gone by the time
Yeah.
second,
You
but
were gone with second,
yeah,
yeah.
but I remember because my kids were already born and whatever, and I remember thinking, like, these people here didn't even know that I had children really, because I never talked about my kids at work,
Yeah.
and here's Jen displaying this basketball in front of her, like this very personal thing,
Yeah.
also making her very vulnerable to anything
Anything.
being in this
Anything.
state
Yeah.
while you are largely pregnant, you
Yes.
know? And I remember this, and because I was thinking to myself, like, there's no way to hide this. And
Mhm.
what if? And,
Right.
all
Right.
of this stuff was happening. I was thinking about, and I was also grateful that I was never pregnant while working in the prison, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
But
and
but for you guys, it's just
it
like,
was
"Okay, this is just what's gonna happen, and
Mhm.
here we are
Yeah.
and living my life," you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so because you can't change that, right? Like, that's
I
just
know.
you can't hide that, you can only hide it for so long, right?
Right, and they don't give you extra time off because you're
Yeah,
pregnant.
no,
Mhm.
no, no, I mean, there's yeah. The other thing that I put on my list of the way my life changed was bills went from my name to my husband's name. So even if there was something that we were on jointly, okay,
Mhm.
everything that I could just put into his name, I put into his name, okay? My kids had a code. We had like a code if we were out in public. And if somebody would come up to me and say, Miss Schmitz, my kids and my husband knew to go in a different direction.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the name that's what they called you
Yep. We
there.
always
Yep.
used, yeah. So there was in some of one of the facilities, the one Terry and I worked in, we were extremely treatment focused and allowed first names to be used, even though
Mhm.
it was a prison, which, hey, guess what? That's okay.
Right.
It's actually alright, like, people knew my name was Jen, and that
I'd
was
rather them just call me
fine.
by my first name, like,
Oh my gosh, but anyways, right,
I'd
like,
rather
they're
not
gonna
know my
but,
last.
oh
It's
no, they're
more
gonna find
identifying.
you, right? Like,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
gonna find you. Yeah, you know what? That whole philosophy goes out the door, right? Like, I mean,
Especially in today's world,
it's so
like
silly. We had staff
Mhm.
now I didn't do this, we had staff that we worked with that actually didn't use their married last name and would use
Mhm.
their maiden last name, okay? We
Yep.
also had staff that wouldn't, wear their wedding rings, things like that. I never
Yep.
did that. I also didn't allow my children to be in any photos for anything, sports, school, anything.
I never signed, so there has
The
to be,
waivers.
like, you
Mhm.
sign the waiver.
Yep.
I would
I
never
don't let
sign
them.
it.
I
No,
never let them do it.
not at that time. Nope, I never did. I'd be like, "Nope,
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
never
letting you."
never did.
Mm-mm.
I also never up until 2 years ago, almost,
Mhm.
I had, like, no digital imprint. So there was
She
Jen did not
didn't.
exist on social media. So,
Right.
like, imagine me trying to start a private practice and having to, like, work here with poor Terry. The first thing I ever put on Facebook, I tried to put our practice, like, logo on Facebook, and it just blew up, and all you could see a part of the bird was just, like, the bird's fucking head, and she's like, "You
What
gotta
is
you gotta crop that down." I'm like,
Yeah,
"I
it
don't know
was
how to
so
do a
funny
post."
because from there till today, like, a year and a half later or so, like, your digital
But
imprint is,
I
like,
had
there.
yeah, I had nothing.
Right.
I shared nothing about myself. I had no social media. At one point, I did develop a Facebook account, and my sister did it behind my back with my information. She knew my email because she's like, "I wanna send you things. You don't even know what's going on in the
Right.
world or with our family or anything." And I'm like, "I don't care. I don't
I don't
need it. I
care.
don't want it." Right? So, these are just a few examples of, like, what I started with and, like, how I shaped and changed my life, which really over time has taught me things that can be for me. There's some traumatizing, not trauma, but traumatizing things that have happened because
Mhm.
I really didn't trust people ever. I was taught to never trust, and we were trained in
No.
that way too, Terry. Right? We were
Yes.
trained, which I think goes under
Well,
this
hold
whole
on.
gaslighting idea.
It is because when you are in a society, because prison is like a society, and
Yes.
everyone there is incarcerated for something,
Hmm.
except for the staff, some staff were, I don't
Well,
know.
they are.
But, I mean,
Mhm.
staff has their fair share of problems, but
Yeah.
when you're in this environment, you feel like even out of the environment, everybody acts like that.
Mhm.
You're in a
Mhm.
concentrated environment of this one thing, right?
Yeah.
Of criminal activity. And
Yeah.
so when you go out, like you can't unknow the shit we know. Like you
Yeah. It
cannot
it
know the
haunts you.
shit that we know.
I wouldn't
So
sit in a restaurant without being by the door and facing the door.
I wouldn't let my son go to a public bathroom. I say my son because I took him into the women's bathroom probably way too long,
Probably till he was
you
about
know?
18.
Still last year. Anyway, but that was easier for me with the girls because,
Well,
just take them into the women's bathroom
and
with
there's this
me, or
other
I
piece
would
of it
be
though.
right,
There's this other piece though, right? Like
Yep.
this is how you're trained to think and we're
Mhm.
giving some general examples
Mhm.
but we functioned under the premise that most people, if not all people, were going to cause harm around us in some way, shape, or form every day.
Right.
So our even in our offices, it's not as though we had safe havens, right? That we could just go sit in our office because our offices were I was right there with
On the
all the
unit.
inmates. Where
Mhm.
they slept, it would be inmate cell, inmate cell, inmate cell, Jen's office, Miss Schmitz's
Well,
office,
and to
inmate cell,
see
inmate cell, inmate cell.
to see one of the inmate/clients that we saw for psych services in the one particular, well, actually, no, I can say that.
And many.
Anywhere I worked, they
They
came
came right
right
in.
into your
They
office,
came
or
right
you
in.
found a isolated place to talk
Yes.
with them
Yes.
that you could preserve their confidentiality,
Yeah.
by yourself.
Therapists working in a correctional facility, now in
Mhm.
hindsight when I look back on this, and even some of the staff that get trained in coaching because we've got uniform staff that do a lot because they do a lot of the work because they're with them way more
Mhm.
than we
All
are.
the
I
time.
mean, they
Yeah.
live there, right? The staff just live there.
Mhm.
It's interesting that we built such a strong structure around not trusting, not sharing, not humanizing, not bringing like humility into things. Like, because as a staff member, you never admit if you fucked up and did something wrong in front of an inmate, right? Like, because that's a weak point. You just gave them a weak
Yep.
point, right?
Yep.
Like, scoreboard ding, they're watching you, right?
Right.
And, but yet that is so counterintuitive to healing, period.
Mhm.
Period.
Yeah.
Like, and that's a very generalized statement when I say this, but I think back on how we were trained and how we delivered therapy and how it is completely counterproductive to helping people.
Most of the stuff we did wasn't even therapy.
I can't like that I have a very for me that truth is very hard. I also know to be true that I pushed all the limits
Yeah.
that I wasn't supposed to either, especially when I became a supervisor
Yeah.
because I really felt like screw this shit. Like, no, I know relationships work. I know being able to talk with people works. I know sitting closer to somebody and having an intimate quote unquote moment with them works. It
Okay, so when I
changes.
became a supervisor, the same thing happened, which
Yeah.
is why I was not a supervisor for very
Yeah.
long.
Yeah. See,
Be
because you follow the rules and you knew like, hey, I'm gonna have to follow these rules and I can't do it. Right. Part of it.
Yes.
And it eats
Well,
away at
and I also
you.
didn't realize that some of them in the new facility that I was a clinical supervisor at, the rules were different,
Yeah.
right? So the rules were different there, and
Yeah. The
so
rules of engagement
I was
change.
having inmates in my office talking with them, and people were freaking the fuck
They were
out, and I was like,
mad.
They were mad, they were upset with me, they were saying I was doing things wrong, and I was like, But wait, this is what
Yeah.
we
How do
used
we
to
how do we
do."
help? Right. How do we heal? How do
Exactly.
we
How do
help?
we do
Right.
this, and how do I maintain confidentiality
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
And also that where I was a clinical supervisor was at a drug and alcohol place, and they're very punitive.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't get your homework done, you got to sit in a timeout,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
facing a wall. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? And so that was the first thing I tried to get rid of, and nobody wanted to get rid of that because it was the only power and control that they had, and I'm like,
And
this is
that's
not about power and
okay.
control. Like, what
But
the fuck?
that is let's read our gaslighting definition that
Yes.
we found in this article,
Oh my gosh.
that was written by a former inmate. Pulled this up before we started, and gaslighting is the
Mhm.
tactic in which the person or entity, in order to gain more power, makes a victim, question their reality. So I want to take that one sentence and go think as a anybody who is in fire and or in police or in corrections, a tactic in which, somebody, an entity, a higher power, right? In order to stay in that power of position, because we are being placed. It is a power move. There's always somebody
Sure.
higher than us, above us, right?
Mhm.
That is going to keep you right where you need to be at bay so you can follow suit, follow rules, and you start to question your reality. Because for some of us, it's like, okay, well, if this is how the prison operates, like I remember being a psychologist, like it's like going, if this is how this operates, even though I know what I learned about rapport, about treatment, about how a treatment intervention needs to be done to be effective, right? Because this stuff's been measured, right?
Mhm.
But I'm being told I can't do it in that way. Jen, you can't do EMDR in that way because you are not allowed to sit that close to somebody. For
Yes.
your hand, Jen, to be within 12 to 16 inches of their eyes and their face, for you to sit, I mean, because you're almost knee to knee, but next to each other, that's not happening. And guess what? If you're going to do it, I am going to have a staff member that is going to stand there the entire time you are doing therapy, looking at them. I mean, it was such, and I remember thinking, okay, well, I'm questioning the reality of everything I've learned in my training. I
Well,
guess
questioning
I have to
the
do it this way.
effectiveness of,
Right.
like, what was the point of them actually coming to therapy? Like,
Right. Like,
when
and so this is, and that's kind of it's, for the psychs of you out there that are listening, right?
Mhm.
Like that is the stuff that starts to happen. So even the interventions in which we would have to give them, we'd have to change them.
Right.
Which again goes, it's a form of gaslighting a bit, because it's, no, this is how you are going to have to do business within these walls. And that how
Well, it's
changes.
this is the right way to do
This
it.
is the way.
You're telling
Yeah.
them this is the right way to do it, and they're going, "But this doesn't feel like the right way to do it."
Mhm. Yeah.
The client,
Yeah.
and you're like, "But it is the right way to do it," even though it's really not the right way to do it,
Yeah.
right? But you
Mhm.
have to do it this way, right, in order to follow the rules and regs of the institution, right?
Eh, yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And it causes harm. Like that can cause harm. Think about it, not only to the staff that are trying to deliver this intervention.
Mhm.
And like we start questioning, well, I guess we can't do it the way we were trained, or I do have to alter it a bit, right?
Yes.
Which is then also not allowing you to do an intervention in the way that it's been
Researched.
researched and measured to be done, right? Which I say those
Mhm.
words and then I hesitate when I say them, because you know how we all feel about
I
gold standard
know, I
research and
know.
proof. Okay. But okay, but so then you're questioning your reality, like as a person working in the prison system, right?
You're kinda gaslighting
Um,
yourself actually in the end, like,
yes, you do.
in the end.
You do.
I
So
do wanna
that's
read I wanna
that's
read these
tough.
11
Uh-huh.
because this person comes up with 11 techniques to manipulate,
Yeah.
okay? And I think they're worthwhile to just so I'm just gonna read them off
Yeah.
because
Read them off.
in order of time.
Yeah.
They tell blatant lies. You know it's an outright lie, yet they're telling you this lie with a straight face,
Oh
okay?
gosh.
Yep. Application to this is an application to prisoners, codes, and politics. An inmate who blatantly lies is a risk.
Yes.
Some used deceit to manipulate their victims and pull off their crimes. Scams and identity theft typically involve some form of deceit, subterfuge, or the abuse of a position of trust, which distinguishes these crimes from common theft or robbery. This category of inmate is a risk. If these inmates lie to other inmates, they can be expected to lie to the administration, possibly becoming a rat. They risk being whacked, hurt, or killed.
Okay. I have to say something about that too.
Yeah.
There is
Snitches get stitches.
yeah, snitches get
Yeah.
stitches and end up in ditches, and that is it is a thing. And so I what I want to say about this too, which can be very tough for people to wrap their mind around. Prison prison is a world inside of the rest of the world that we have. It is its own metropolis. It's its own
Mhm.
organism. Okay. The way that prisons run and the people in them, the rules are very different than the rules out in the real world, which really truly does not help prepare people for the real world. Because guess what, everybody, most people do get out of prison. I hate to break it to you, but if you think
Yeah.
that everybody's
They're your
behind the
neighbors.
walls for the rest of their life, most are
They're
not.
not.
Okay. They're
Mhm.
not. And so, but within the prison is its own set of rules. And there's two sets of rules. There are the administrative rules and the codes that we as staff are to follow, that are given given us by the state that we live in. Most prisons are not privatized, right? They are run as a state formed facility, right? But then there's the inmates code, and you do not lie. You do not snitch. For people who are in prison, and people are like, oh, they have absolutely no morals, right? Or they have no, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. Like, believe it or not, they actually are the most loyal
Yes.
people
I was gonna say,
to the
they know the
culture.
difference between a lie and a truth,
Yes.
and the difference between a lie and a truth could save their life.
Correct. And they're
Yeah.
not going to give that away, because if they would, or if they are in a space where then their lives can be extremely harmed within the prison.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's a whole nother level of value and honesty and respect that exists within the prison culture that they are not going to break. So even though people will say to me, oh, they don't have any morals, they don't have any values, they're not honest, they don't respect anything. Oh,
Mm.
but they do.
Yeah.
And this is to stay alive, for many of them. So I just wanted to say that, because that exists in there, and it impacts the staff as well. It
Mhm.
impacts us, and we come out again not unscathed with some of that too, if you think about
No.
that. So
Right,
anyways.
exactly.
Mhm.
So this one is an interesting one because it's kinda relevant to what we're going through right now in today's political climate. Application to politics. Blatant lies by politicians are handled through government investigations and special prosecutors. These procedures are slow and methodical and are vigorously challenged by the accused or the accused political supporters. Richard Nixon's impeachment is a study in the process of extra prison institutional handling of a lying politician, where the definition of being whacked means not maiming or death, but loss of office and being subject to a pardon.
Yes.
And so when Jen and I started this podcast, I said, we're the whistleblowers, like deep
We are.
throat
We're the
whistleblowing
deep
things. And I'm like,
throating,
so this one
whistleblowing
really
shrink.
resonates with the whole thing. But even in prison systems, like the government structure is the staff and the higher ups and things like
Yes.
that. It's
Yes.
also the inmates because they have their own government structure often,
They have
you
their own
know?
government structure. Correct.
Yeah, they
That's the
do. Like,
culture
we
within
know
it.
who
And
runs inmates sometime or
yes.
who's in charge of other inmates. I mean, there was one
Yes.
particular one that I can recall who was still leading a huge gang in Colorado, I believe,
Sure.
from the prison
Yeah.
system that we're
Mhm.
in. Like,
We
they
had we
still
had
had
many of those.
power.
Yeah.
Yes, they
We
still
had
had
many of
all
those.
this power or a lot of power just with, I worked in a male facility, so my that's why I'm gonna say this. So a lot of power men over women on the outside,
Mhm.
there was still a lot of power and control and,
Yeah.
a whole political structure there,
Yeah. And
so interesting.
and that's, when people seem to think that, if you are a state-run facility, the things the processes, the procedures, the treatment interventions, the rules, okay, it's not as though you get to make those for yourself, okay? These come down from the government structure up above, right? So, it starts with, who's the governor of your state?
Right,
Who do they want to be your secretary of corrections? You
right,
know, who does that person then want to be the administrator of corrections? And so what's interesting that people might not realize either is most of the things that we did, the initiatives that came across the table that we needed to implement in prisons. As a supervisor, I did a lot of this, and some of it drove me nuts, because we'd have to sit and hold our breath till November to figure out whether or not we could
who's
even move
yes,
forward on anything.
on
And
an
we'd all
initiative,
just sit
yeah.
there, and just have to wait, because it's very politically driven, because it's a state facility. So if people out there seem to have this impression that, like, well, all of the interventions, or the initiatives that are happening in the prison systems are a direct result of the people that are working there, um, it's not. We
Right.
are
Well,
told
and I
what
think
the next big thing
there's
is.
definitely a misnomer that prison is rehabilitation, and it's not,
No.
and that is also dependent upon your elected officials at the time
Yes.
somewhat, right? So, but
Yes.
mostly, and I found this little information, and I think it's worthwhile sharing. Um, I just typed in, "Is prison or jail effective punishment?" And Jen and I already know this.
Yeah.
No, punishment itself is not effective. for changing behavior. And it was, it actually says punishment, makes the likelihood of reoffending greater.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Holy shit, why?" And it said because of the trauma that happens while you are incarcerated. So you are, getting traumatized people who have already have trauma, more trauma, or
Sure.
sometimes just traumatized, period, and
Yeah.
then pushing them out into the community with more trauma
Mhm.
or with initial trauma. I don't know. I'm going to say more because most of those people have a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
But that trauma then causes reoffending and things like
Right.
that, or
Well,
addictions
yes.
and, all the
Yes.
things, and here we go back in the cycle again.
Yeah,
But it's
it's
funny because they talk about, and Jen and I have talked about this too, like, so instead of incarceration or long-term incarceration, like, rehabilitation, alcohol and drug treatment, I'm like, "That's all sounds great too, but our addiction treatment system is not good," you
it it
know?
it is not, and people, I think what the gaslighting too that occurs as it comes to the what's put out to the public for
Yeah,
recidivism rates, okay?
yeah.
Get curious really about what that actually means, because the more you dig, the more you're gonna find that some of the what recidivism looks like, right, and how it's measured is
Recidivism is reoffending rates,
yeah,
essentially,
reoffending
yeah.
rates, yes.
Mhm.
How it's measured is I mean, and I could go on forever with this and I can't because we only have 1 hour podcast, but it's something to just really get curious about because how it's measured, the interventions that we look at of how to determine whether or not you're considered like someone who has reoffended again, the circumstances behind it, those
Well,
numbers
can't reoffending just be as simple as you
you
didn't
broke
follow a
one
rule
of
of
your
probation? Yeah.
you broke one of the standard 23 rules that we have on there, one of which is you cannot be within so many feet of a bar.
Right, and that is
Oh,
considered reoffending,
you
and you're
reoffended,
back in
yes.
jail or prison, yeah.
And there's
Mhm.
there's more, right? Like I think in our state we started to get to a space where we were really getting to more of the nitty gritty of it. But part of the issue with this is that when reoffending happens, it's not as though inmates come back through into the prison and they get all this great like treatment and then they go back out. And so
Right,
people
mhm.
also have this idea that there is these great levels of treatment that are happening, but many of them don't. They sit there and the process is very slow. It takes 3 to 6 months to even get
Mhm.
through intake, and then you only got a year and a half on your sentence, and there's a year and a half to 2 year wait list for something.
Or
So
you
you're
have a
sitting
longer
around
sentence, and so you sit and you wait until the
'cause
last
you have it
6
too long.
months.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly, so you mhm.
it's not what you really think it is, but that kind of adds to this idea of what we're talking about with how staff, and inmates can come in without trauma and be exposed to these dynamics in this environment that happens and come out very, very traumatized. You can be
Mhm.
an inmate who goes into prison and has some type of a crime, that is deemed prison worthy, right? But you've never been through some significant traumas. For the most
Mhm.
part, there's been some stability in your life. But when you come into an environment where snitches
There's
get
not.
stitches and end up in
Right.
ditches, guess what?
Mhm.
You're going to come out very differently, which reminds me so much of what happens to our troops and
Yeah.
to so many of our military personnel, some who have never
Mhm.
even seen or not even in active combat and have not been
Right.
through that, but they get through even basic training and the environment changes things so much and shapes them so much because of what you're exposed to. Same goes with the staff.
Mhm.
Some of the things that are seen in a prison, Terry, you and I say this a lot. I You can't unsee them.
No.
Um, I still see them. Uh, I think as a supervisor and also as a psych, being exposed to the raw reality of it happening right there in vivo,
Well,
and
yes, and we didn't get to see all of it. So if you think about a staff member who worked exclusively on a unit, like a segregation unit or something like that, that
yeah,
sees it all the time. Like I
yes,
would only see it if it were a client that were assigned to me.
yeah,
Like
yep,
I wouldn't just go down these hallways just for
yeah,
funsies to take a look. It was
yes,
either I was on call or if it was assigned to
yes,
me at some point. These other staff members are witnessing
yes,
this trauma all the
repeatedly.
time. all
And
the
if
time.
you are an officer, you're it's happening, or a sergeant or even a captain, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's happening to you very directly. If you are a lieutenant, captain, program supervisor, some type of supervisor of some sorts, you're the one that then is reviewing footage over and over and over and over,
Yes.
even if you weren't present for it. If you were present for it, you're part of doing all the reports and things, but
So I
you're
wanna
you're
I
doing the
wanna
investigation on the
yeah.
back end.
I want to bring clarity to this too, because the first introduction to the trauma that I didn't realize was trauma at the time was me reading files. So it wasn't even me
Yeah.
witnessing it visually or being part of it. It was reading
Yep.
files. So when you have to read files over and over again, or watch video over and over again, or witness it firsthand, all of that is contributing to a trauma response,
Yeah.
And so I remember it was like my first week and I had a stack of files of some sex offender stuff. And
Yeah.
I had younger children at home. I'm reading these files. I'm crying my eyes out.
Yeah.
I went home and I told my husband, I said, I don't think I can do this. And I was like, but I don't have any other choices here. So I have to go back and do it. Right. Like
I
that whole, I have to
Yes.
do this. Right. Hmm.
Yeah, I can sit with that, not only, like, as a psych doing that with you too, but at the near the end of my career, getting to a point where it was almost a pride thing that we could sit and eat lunch while watching these videos, because
Oh,
we would be in a space of like, okay, we don't have time, we have to get through this, we've got to eat.
it's been
And
so
so
desensitized.
yes,
Yeah.
you're so desensitized to it that sometimes you don't recognize that it's happening, and
Mhm.
it kind of becomes of like that pride thing. Well, yeah, I can sit and I can eat a sandwich and read this, and I
Right.
can sit and eat a sandwich and watch a video of somebody doing something very horrific to themselves, because I have to watch this. I've got to go bit by bit and watch what my staff did. I got to be able to give them feedback. I got and 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 it just you
I will
can't
tell you that
un
for a large amount, until I started doing exclusively psych evaluations, towards the end of my state stay before I became a supervisor, I was exclusively doing psych evals. Between when I started and that point in my career, I was not looking at files anymore. Like, I
yeah.
stopped because I couldn't do it anymore. And I would say things like, well, it's because I want a clean slate. I want to get to know this person on their own. But I really know what it was. It was that I was done being traumatized. Like, I couldn't do it anymore. So that was a self protective measure that I didn't at the time
Oh. Mhm.
realize, and now it's really just kinda now thinking through it, that was a self-protective measure to not be more traumatized, you know? So,
So
yeah,
it's
that
just
was
not
my
it's not as
self-care.
glamorous as,
It's
it's not as glamorous as we might think it is, right?
And to be honest, I mean, and I feel bad because there's a lot of staff that gets assaulted and things like that. Terrible stuff can happen within prisons to other inmates,
And it
to other
does.
staff. I dodged a bullet a time or two with that myself, and
Same.
am grateful that nothing worse ever happened to me. Also
Yeah.
grateful that I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
It prison working in the prisons or for the state, whatever, is like the golden handcuffs. We talk about it all the time. Like, it's too good to leave, all the
It's
all the
yes,
benefits and
the
everything were just
the
too good to leave.
incentives,
Yep.
it's
Mhm.
too good to leave. And so that's
Yep.
the dedication, or the shout out, I guess, a little bit on this episode as we wrap up here, is for people that are still in it, um, because it's
People are
not
looking to
easy.
get into it, like.
Yeah, or looking to get into it. Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
it's not easy to get out of it,
Mhm.
and getting into it, if you're gonna get into it, know
You're
what
not
you're
gonna
getting
change a system if
know
you're
what
gonna
you're
get
getting
into
into.
it. Yeah, that's just it. Like,
Mhm.
if you're
Give
getting
yourself a little
into it.
dose of informed consent before
Yes,
you get it.
100%. If you are somebody who wants to get into it because you want to help, the populations that need the help the most, right? And that would be the men and women who are incarcerated.
Yeah.
It's a great career, it really is, but don't go into it thinking you're going to change systems somehow. You're not. You're going to be a cog within the system, right? The system is too big for you to influence change in any way.
Mm,
So that's the eyes wide open part of this.
yes.
And thankfully, I was too small minded to even think that I needed to change a system at the time. You know,
Mhm.
it wasn't until I became a supervisor that I was like, this system is terrible. That was it. And then I left it within 6 months. It was like, bing, the light bulb's on. I gotta get the fuck out of here. And I did. Like it was at that point that I realized even as a supervisor, I couldn't influence change the way that it needed to be influenced. So
And I still want to say thank you to everyone that is still in it,
yeah.
but also get curious about being out of it.
Yeah. And take care of yourself while you're there.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. That
Yeah.
wraps up another episode of the Gaslit Truth. I hope you guys don't mind that we share our personal stories sometimes about prison because I think we've done it a time or two. But to me, it's an interesting look into our histories and
Mhm.
yeah, just like where the gaslighting really began for us. So thank you for listening and staying tuned. And we've got more wonderful guests heading in the Gaslit Truth podcast very soon. So make sure you
Yeah.
like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to see us, head on over to YouTube
Yeah.
and to the Gaslit Truth podcast. Give us your comments, send us your emails, thegaslittruthpodcast@gmail.com. And that's a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.